Welcome to the King Exchange. It is Saturday, February 8th. We are 10 days removed from the Davos framework deal on Greenland and 1 month into the Trump administration's experiment in remote governance of Venezuela. Today on the King Exchange, we're pulling back the curtain on the technology that's making these geopolitical moves possible. To do that, I am joined by our panel. David, founder and owner of Jay in Washington. David is our bridge to Central Florida politics and a master of the I-4 corridor's shifting landscape. We're also joined by Kellen, operations director at Jay in Washington. Kellen is our voice for civil and international rights, keeping a watchful eye on the human cost of global policy. And last but not least, we're joined by Steve, our special guest. Steve is an IT veteran and business owner who has spent years tracking the digital footprints of this new era. So all of you, thank you for joining us on the King Exchange.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So Steve, first question to you before we hit the big topics. I know you've been following the heart-wrenching disappearance of Nancy Guthrie in Arizona, as we all are. Savannah Guthrie is pleading for proof of life, but she's warning the world, do not trust the video. Steve, would you say that AI has turned a kidnapping investigation into a hall of mirrors?
Yeah, so I think what they mean by that is that they could have, I don't know, I think they've received possibly videos or things they're probably just not releasing on the investigation. And, with AI, you could just take a picture. Like, you ever see that where someone takes a picture of their grandparents from the 1920s and it animates them and it shows them hugging and, eating dinner and things. And so I think that's where the concern is where in the past, when you look for evidence of life, you held up a newspaper, and you said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm being held against my will." And like the Coca-Cola executive, I think it was over in Rio de Janeiro, that was kidnapped at one point. That's one of the methods they use to show proof of life. So I think AI is adding a distrust or a new complication with law enforcement. So I don't know if they've received a video, but I mean, there's rumors out there. There's hints out there by them that they did mention during one of the conferences that AI is or has muddied it for a proof of life, but they didn't confirm they got a video, but it seemed like they hinted they did, and they can't trust it maybe, but they're definitely holding their cards tight to their chest. So I think that's that is a new challenge for law enforcement. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The reason I mentioned this case, apart from just the emotional impact and the whole country's on it. I mean, you have the president of the United States commenting on this, and we're a week into it as of today, and it looks like there's really no new developments. I mean, it's scary to think how AI could play a role in this. And when we talk about our discussion from last week, we are focusing on geopolitical landscapes across the world, but we're also highlighting how AI and this new era of technology can impact us at home. And in the case of Nancy Guthrie, it's just a question to raise whether or not AI is playing a role in this, from the ransom letters that some of them have been proven to be fraudulent to the ones out right now, if they're even legitimate themselves. And again, how far does technology play in a case of a disappearance or kidnapping?
Sean,
Dave,
I have a question. I'm vaguely familiar with this case. May I ask one question? And it's, who was the last time who saw Miss Guthrie?
the last person to see Miss Guthrie, I believe it was someone of her family. I believe it was, I could be mistaken, but I believe from last I checked, it was her daughter, Savannah Guthrie's sister, and then there was some connection with the son-in-law. So if that was Nancy's daughter's husband, um, I believe she had left the house and then they dropped her back off. Um, I'm not too exact on that or too certain, because they have been sort of going back and forth. The investigators and police have left the property, returned, and back and forth. So I'm not exactly sure. Some are suggesting that there's like a familiarity between the possible suspect or person of interest, although they do not have one at the moment, and Nancy
Okay.
herself, or if it's a total stranger. But again, my point here being again and even with the cameras, um, the Nest camera, the ring from the doorbell
Hmm.
was out front. Um, those were not working. She didn't have an active subscription on them. Again, could AI have played a role? Could the cyber warfare, as we talk, although it sounds so gigantic and large at scope, it really can impact us at the home. And so when we're talking about security internationally, we also have to think about it regionally and locally. So I
Okay.
like to go to the headlines. The U.S. is now effectively running Venezuela remotely after Maduro's capture last month. Interim leader Delcy Rodriguez is in place, but President Trump just announced we're seizing 50 million barrels of oil, valued at $3 billion, to pay for regional security. Steve, is it possible that the White House is using AI monitored infrastructure to ensure the Venezuelan power grid doesn't collapse during this transition?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much going to be every corporation, even locally here, that's using AI to monitor the security and infrastructure. So that goes back to the SIEM, which is basically like the black box for a business, so to speak, that collects it's like a flight data recorder for the business. So that has evolved to have an AI component in there. So usually you have an analyst that watches it and looks for alerts or triggers based on algorithm, and then now you have AI that does that. So I'm pretty sure they are. I can't confirm that. AI definitely can automate things and look for anomalies. I'm sure they are doing that for our power grid as well. I don't know if the government is, but when it comes down to Venezuela, I'm sure they're using a lot of contractors for that. So I don't know if it's really the government, because the government's not really good at certain things, you know.
I mean,
Um, so I would think that it was if anything, it's a government contractor doing it. So, and probably using AI for sure.
after your talk with the IT director of the Panama Canal, how vulnerable is a national grid to this kind of remote control? You mentioned Stuxnet last episode. Would this be a Stuxnet 2.0?
For the control and takeover, it could be. I hope. I don't know. I don't want to say I hope for or I hope against. I just hope whatever method was used, it's kept a state secret. Because once our state secrets are released, then they're used against us. So that's my concern with that.
When we're talking about the transition from Stuxnet's break the machine approach to 2026's control the machine approach via IoT sensors, how does that play a role in the geopolitical landscape, Steve, when we're transitioning to new forms of technology? Although you said those technologies have existed in the past and we're still using them, they are evolving. How evolved are they with this transition?
Um, I don't know. I don't think. I mean, in order to reprogram the infrastructure. I mean, just anything. They're not proprietary systems, but they're unique to where, for example, every water treatment plant in, let's say, Orange County is unique. The systems aren't, but they're unique because the number of valves is different. Let's say from downtown Orlando, you might have I don't know anything about their treatment plants or anything, but the valves that control the water leaving and entering the system could be twice as many as something from, let's say, Ocoee or Kissimmee, right? And so those systems have to be programmed uniquely. So to upgrade those systems and those PLC controllers, there has to be downtime or it has to be in manual mode, and it's costly, it's risky. There's got to be a lot of programming. So to upgrade, let's say, I don't know how many water treatment plants, that's probably a bad example to give at the beginning, but I don't know how many there are in the county here, but there has to be probably close to at least 100 or so, 100 different components. There's lift stations. There's so many things that are involved for those. So to get them all networked together and upgraded and be unison, it would be a multi-year approach. That's not something that where it's like upgrading from Windows 10 to Windows 11. Like it's literally physically replacing systems, and a lot of them are hardwired in, and they're trying to go to a more economic approach when they're trying to do connecting PLCs directly at the pumps versus being in a pump control room. So I do know that, and it makes them less costly to operate and troubleshoot. So it's not quick. We're talking years. So,
and I'm sure it's been in development for many years. Shifting to the humanitarian cost and the violation of sovereignty in Venezuela, Kellen, the G7 is warning of restrictive measures if the US continues this unilateral remote governance. Is this a new form of digital colonialism?
I would say it depends on, right. I would say it depends on how long, this unilateral control lasts for, right? Transitory leadership, in the aftermath of conflict is a thing that's happened for ages and ages and ages. The idea that, you have like kind of transitory leadership, but it's actually being controlled by another country, but not officially, that is kind of a novel concept. And I think that's what the G7 is worried about. It's like, if you're going to be effectively owning a country or effectively running a country, you need to come out and say what it is. If you are, not respecting the sovereignty of another nation, you can't be masquerading. And I think that's at least what the takeaway I was getting from, that statement by the G7. Is just a concern that, the concern that U.S. or anybody else could just turn every other country into a puppet state if they really wanted to. And that's no way to do things for the people of Venezuela, and certainly, a very disruptive practice if that is how this is going. But whether or not that is the case or not, I think remains to be seen, because it depends on how long this transitory leadership lasts.
David, would you agree that Venezuela would be a puppet state of the United States? We remember with Maduro's capture last month, there were many Venezuelans, both in Venezuela and in the United States, specifically in the Venezuelan communities in South Florida, celebrating and rejoicing in this. I think many Venezuelans are happy and appreciative of this capture. So would you say that it's worth it? Is Venezuela a puppet state, as Kellen suggests?
No.
At the moment, definitely.
No. Am I mute or am I?
No.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you fine, dude.
Oh, okay. No, the current government is a holdover from the Maduro regime. It's just that it has a different face, and that is actually cooperating with the United States. We've seen political prisoners released from jail. We are seeing more of its oil industry opening up to the world, not just the United States. We're seeing an opportunity for Venezuelans here in America to return back to their home country. Those who were protected by, TPS and the parole protections have now been told, go home. You're free to go home. It's safer than it was before when Maduro was in office. The United States is not in control of their government. We'll soon see announcements for elections. We will soon see further cooperation by Daisy. See, I forgot her last name already. Rodriguez, right?
I think
the
that's
vice
right.
president who's now acting
Let me
president.
check.
Yeah, the vice president who is now acting president. But more importantly, we saw the capture of Maduro. We saw him being brought to America. Some would say brought to America for his own safety, because Maduro was the linchpin to a lot of the illicit activity that fueled the cartels, that fueled terrorist groups like ISIS, Hamas, and Hezbollah, that fueled the imperialist, globalist agenda from the city of London, and the banks that, benefited from the fentanyl trade, the drug trade, from terrorism. We're seeing now, the Monroe Doctrine, the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine play itself out. And we're seeing business as usual for the globalists come to an end, pretty much. So I would think,
and I'd like to elaborate on myself a little bit. I personally don't think that Venezuela is a power state. I mean, we have, our hand in their, power grid cookie jar, so to speak. And, we are kind of enforcing elections, but that's just transitory leadership. I wouldn't consider that colonialism. I think,
right. Okay.
I think the G7 has a hypothetical concern that has yet to prove itself true or false.
And the G7 is against, national sovereignty. And that's what, the Trump administration in America, in its policy, in its foreign policy, in its international economic policy and national economic policy, and of course its war policy, is just saying, hey, we need to, go back to the Alexander Hamilton, American economy of doing business, and strengthen national sovereignty in the Western Hemisphere, so that we could trade amongst one another, make deals with one another across the world, and give everyone the opportunity to prosper.
Steve, I'd like to loop you into this discussion before we move on to discussing Greenland. I know you suggested last time that AI and cyber warfare may have played a role in this capture of Maduro. Would you say that the use of AI, if it was, was it worth it? Was it successful with everything that David had just mentioned with this capture? It sounds like, it was pretty successful. And if this is how we are moving into the future, AI could play a very positive role in how we move about this with other nations. Or would you believe that the detriments outweigh the positives?
Well, I think it's actually kind of related to this Guthrie investigation. And one thing I want to say, where you get your positives and negatives. So, for example, back to the Guthrie thing, and then I'll bring it back to this. So you saw on the news there was drone video, and we all saw this drone video, and it's going outside around the house, right? And then these ransom notes come in, and now you see the police on the roof of the house or outside the house. Well, have you ever used your AI to go through your refrigerator and say, well, these are all the ingredients I have. Just record a video on your phone. Do it after you watch this. Record all your ingredients, go in your pantry, your spices and everything, and send that video into AI and say, what can I make with all the ingredients and things I have in my fridge? And I'm thinking Italian. And it'll actually say, oh, you have milk, you have this. It knows exactly what you have in your fridge. And so you have this drone video outside this house, right? And then you can take her Facebook pictures and you could put that all in AI. And yeah, she's got a floodlight. Yeah, she's got a Nest camera. She's got a Ring doorbell. Like, you could get a lot of specifics just from AI, and you could quickly draft up some sort of note. So I'm not sure if the ransom note is real. I think that's why they're taking it with a grain of salt. It could be a scammer, and then some other country that we don't have extradition permissions from or something. I'm sure they're tracing that down because the notes are coming through email, electronic. Which, if it was someone that was just a kidnapper and wasn't organized, they would definitely hide their tracks. But if it's a scammer, or wouldn't be able to hide their tracks so well. But if it's a scammer, they're hiding their tracks pretty well because digital footprints are pretty easy to trace. Now bring that back to the Venezuelan part. Well, surveillance. So it's the same thing. Drones flying around with the news people at the Guthrie's house. You send a drone out there. Could be a $50 drone, a little 4K thing with a little memory card. Could be a kid out there. He uploads it to the internet, or could have been just someone flying a drone over the power systems there, and the AI can tell you, oh, well, that's the model transformer they use. It could recognize the shapes of everything. It can give you an itemized list and a lot of information fairly quickly, where before, if you had, let's say, satellite surveillance, and AI could be used with that in conjunction, I'm sure. But if you had other surveillance, in the past, it took a team of people to say, oh, well, that's the model of this that they see. And that's, information gathering is very important, especially when it comes down to any type of operation, whether it's, for business or if it's for warfare or cyber warfare. And the more information you have, you could figure out, fairly quickly what you need to do to compromise the system. And I think AI is speeding that process up significantly. Just doing it at home on my refrigerator and testing that out, it was pretty impressive, and it was very accurate.
Mhm.
And I just have access to the consumer stuff. You know what I mean? I don't just imagine the government's AI's
Yeah,
capabilities.
you have to
I,
think what's. Oh,
I
David.
I have a question, and Steve, if you can help me out. I am totally new, not totally, but I'm aware there's an investigation. I'm aware that Miss Guthrie's daughter is some type of TV personality. Just a couple of questions to help me kind of understand everything, because I haven't really been following it. And I asked that question about who was the last one who saw her, and I'll explain why after I ask these questions. First, was Miss Guthrie like independently wealthy?
Well, I think I may be able to answer this more. Again, I'm not an expert on this, and I did confirm that it was the son-in-law who was the last to see her. He dropped her off. I believe her house. I mean, Savannah Guthrie is the anchor of the Today Show. She covers the Macy's
Okay.
Day Parade, so she comes from her background. She does have. She is well off. I don't know if the mother was independently wealthy, but she definitely was wealthy. Her house, I believe, was valued at 1 million. But it wasn't anything that stood out from the rest of the neighborhood in that area. She lived in a good neighborhood, so it wasn't like her house stood out in any other way that the other houses didn't. So, and then no valuables were stolen, I believe, from her house. And now they're suggesting that this may actually not have anything to do with money or financial itself, that it may be some sort of revenge or something very personal.
And I ask those questions. And one last one before I make my statement. When she left, I guess she was with her family, her other daughter and the son-in-law. Were there other family members from wherever she was being dropped off from? What was the circumstances? Do we know anything about that?
I believe with that she had left the okay, so on this Saturday, January 31st, that would have been a week ago, at 5:30, she took an Uber to her family's home for dinner. Then 4 hours later at 9:48, she is dropped off in Tucson, Arizona by a family member who is the son-in-law.
Okay.
She goes to the family's home for dinner. I believe that would have been her daughter Annie. Savannah was not there. And the garage door opens. 2 minutes later, the garage door closes. That was something that was also suspicious, just because the garage door would normally close within like 30 seconds, not 2 minutes. And then on Sunday, February 1st, in the early morning, the doorbell camera is disconnected. And at 2:12, the camera software detects movement, but there's no video available since she did not have an active subscription, meaning the footage was not saved. Then at 2:28, her pacemaker app disconnects from her phone. And then lastly, what was very alarming was that the family checks on her after she did not show up at church at 11:56. The family calls 911 to report a missing person, but that is about 12 hours the next day almost.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you would think with the pacemaker app disconnecting from her phone, Nancy's phone, that a family member would have been alerted. Normally, when you think of like, I've fallen and I can't get up, those commercials, it would either contact authorities or contact the
Right.
close
So one
emergency.
thing I want to mention here that we're talking, especially with this, and the garage door opening, garage door closing, doorbell camera missing, and then the nest. And this is something I think they're holding to their chest about this, because from an IT perspective, like, she had a front door and the doorbell camera went missing, but there wasn't forced entry. They're not mentioning forced entry, right? I have a feeling, and this is for everyone watching, and I'm gonna tell you right now: change your passwords, enable two-factor authentication. MFA. It's called multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication. It's not hard to figure out your password. It's usually your pet is involved in your password, or a child's name.
Yeah.
Don't put names or words. Just look up password security. So this is and I'm telling you, I'm probably got the nail on the head on this one. I'm pretty confident what I'm about to say.
Let's hear it, Steve. I think I know where you're going with this.
Someone compromised her password, knows her password to she probably owns MyQ or her Nest account, which can open and close her garage. That's how they know the garage opened and closed. Someone remotely opened the garage through the cloud, got into her system, opened her garage, went into the house, knew the Nest subscription was gone, and Google intentionally will not record your video because you didn't pay them, and
That's
therefore
right.
they won't have an archive of it. They overwrite it.
Yep.
They knew that. And then they knew the doorbell camera, so all they had to do was probably open the door without putting their head out, rip it off. Doorbell, they knew they had a doorbell camera. I mean, they didn't touch anything else they didn't need to touch. That's why they were so tech savvy, and they left the Nest camera there, and it just recorded a meta event. A meta event is when it's not a video event, but it's a log entry like the Sims use, like I'm talking about. And that's why they have that. It's a meta event that says, oh, I saw a person. That's what I think happened.
Right. And Steve, I'm going to take it further because I used to work with law enforcement, federal marshals, local law enforcement, and learned a lot from them when I managed teams of child abuse and neglect investigators. We would have local law enforcement and everyone else, even the FBI I work with. Let's see, here in Florida, as a matter of fact. And I learned from almost all of them is that the most easy, simple answer is pretty much your answer. And typically, the last person who saw the victim alive is your suspect, is the one who may have done it. So that's why I asked, in the beginning, who's the last person who saw her? And given what you just said, Steve, knowing all this information about the tech, because I live here, my mother lives elsewhere, and I know how to, I know those things for her own safety. And so I wouldn't be surprised that someone who knows her well, knows the home well, is probably your prime suspect. And it looks like the last person who saw her was her son-in-law. So I'm sure he's being looked at very closely right now.
Yeah, and I think also this is where I think because the federal government's involved, and it comes down to what is the ethical thing with these cameras. Like, did she know the subscription was expired? Did the family know that? Did the family, like, you can add family members to your cameras so that they get alerts? Did she know, like, did they know it was, I think there's an ethical duty. Like, if you have a camera system in your house and you can assume that, hey, they're recording.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if, I don't know. I think this is going to turn out to be even bigger with that, because I think that it like, and and if you own a nice house and you live alone, you should have security. You should have an alarm system.
Yeah.
And anything to deter. But obviously, I think this is more. Someone had access, compromised their password, and that's what I think happened. And it's probably the same password for the Nest and the Ring and her garage software.
I think I think what Steve is bringing to light, and also you, David, I would have to agree that the son-in-law definitely is a person of interest, although they're coming out and saying that we don't have a person of interest or a suspect. Behind the scene, I'm sure they are looking at him. And it is very sad. I pray for the family. I mean, my grandmother is 84, and I can only imagine the fear. And it's scary to think if it can happen to her, who else can it happen to? And if it is something that is within the family, then that we'll see. I would like to bring it to
one more thing, Sean. One more thing. Most crimes are committed by people you already know. So the odds are that it was probably
that's true.
and
it was probably her son-in-law or maybe her son-in-law and daughter. Who knows? But it was someone she knew.
I agree. So before I'd like to move on. That was definitely interesting discussion. Venezuela to Nancy Guthrie in Tucson, Arizona. Greenland, the president backed off of the military threats at Davos, but the administration is still pushing for American access. A poll out of this week shows 73% of Americans oppose an invasion, but the White House is now offering $100,000 to every Greenland resident to support a referendum. David, is this real estate diplomacy brilliant or a diplomatic disaster for NATO?
It's the art of the deal. That's what it is. And Trump did not back down. If we haven't learned anything about Donald Trump, and I've been following this dude for 40 years, he's not unfamiliar to us, and he's pretty much written the playbook. Donald Trump will go all the way up here. I mean, he will throw everything at you, knowing that he wants to meet you right here. And so, what he got from Davos was one saying that, the rules based economies are done and over. The globalist approach to economics is gone. We're moving back to the American style of economics. He had 300 members of his delegation. There were several impactful speeches. One that just resonates. It was a lesson in Hamiltonian. I guess I could say that, but Alexander Hamilton's American economy, sovereign economy approach to doing business, so to speak. What Trump accomplished was what he intended to happen. And again, he forced the NATO partners to bend the knee to him and say, okay, we're going to do whatever we can to stop what you're trying to do in Greenland. And they send a meager, dog sled team to Greenland to stop an invasion. An invasion was never going to happen. In the end, Trump and company left Davos with an agreement in Greenland that's in the works to increase bases, to have a presence and perpetually, is that a word? Perpetually have, an American presence in Greenland. We now have the basis to create the Golden Shield, or the Golden Dome, the Golden Dome, the missile defense system, where Greenland was very important in that. We also have access to the Northwest Passage. We're able to monitor Chinese and Russian shipping, the potential threat of, the Russians or the Chinese sending a sub or warships closer to America than ever before. It was successful. It was something that the Greenland Agreement was essential to United States security, national security. Again, Greenland is in the Western Hemisphere. And so it falls right into that Monroe Doctrine, Trump corollary belief that we need to protect our own backyard, and Greenland is part of that backyard. And we need to use whatever resources we have, whether it's military, whether it's monetary, whether it's culture, whatever, to help regain and strengthen national sovereignty.
Kellen, I'll posit the same question to you. Is this real estate diplomacy brilliant or a total diplomatic disaster?
So I will concur with David on the point that this is presumably, that I also would agree. I think this is what Trump was aiming for with the whole thing. Whether you think it's ethical, and I will table that for now. But as far as what I will say, though, is the administration is, I think, very misguided in going for Greenland, because when we look at what threats we have to the USA, right, we're concerned about the Arctic. We're concerned that Russian and Chinese forces can find ways to strike at us from the north. So where are the places that are vulnerable? Alaska, first off. Alaska, here on the east coast of the United States, which was what the Greenland thing talks about. It's mostly like the New England area. Russia's an ocean away from there, but it's a mere sea away from Alaska. And that's where Russian and Chinese ships are being found, right? That's like, even as recent as last year, there have been Chinese ships, like a lot of research vessels, basically going into our space. The administration has yet to make a move on how we're going to defend Alaska, how we're going to keep, Russians and Chinese away from Alaska. That has not been happening. The effort has been on Greenland. And then there's the Greenland thing itself, right? You talked about, national security, Dave, right? It's, can we intercept things that are coming? Well, we already have bases designed to do just that. And like mid last year, Denmark themselves were putting up more to do that very same thing. We already have that. And also you're saying, hey, look, we can have more monitoring of ships in Greenland. Well, we have been monitoring ships in Greenland. We have these things called satellites. And the problem that we're having with Russian ships isn't on Greenland, it's on Svalbard, right? There haven't been, for example, like there's been no Chinese ships in Greenland. Then there's been few, and I think there was one last year in Greenland, but there's many in Svalbard. Svalbard, if you don't know, is a Norwegian island chain in the Arctic, a little further away.
Mm-hmm.
Svalbard is the much bigger and more important conflict, and it is with a NATO country, right? And you see a lot of these tensions that are coming up with NATO. Now, our soft power within NATO's soft powers and extensions is what keeps Russia away from Svalbard. Because right now, Russia can already hit the U.S. from Russian territory, because they have islands up there in the Arctic. They can hit the U.S. from Russian territory already, but not, a lot. It's like, like the upper quarter of the East Coast. If they were to take Svalbard, we were not to be a part of NATO, we were not there to defend Svalbard, they could hit almost the entire East Coast, almost all the way down here to Florida. That is where the real conflict is, which is why I think we're kind of missing a lot of it when we're talking about, we're defending our own with Greenland. If we break our alliance with NATO, or we seriously strain our alliance with NATO, then that opens up Svalbard as a front. And that is, I think, a much bigger concern than any Greenlandic operation. And again, a lot of the issues that we brought up with Greenland, they are legitimate, which is why many, many years ago, we have already been taking corrective measures. And even last year, Denmark themselves were already taking measures to do just that. They're already taking measures to intercept more things. We've already been tracking shipping lanes with satellites. In mining, they've been opening up mining. American companies don't need American soil to do American business. We do business all around the world already. I think if we are really going to focus on defending our own, we need to do better to prepare to defend Alaska. If anything, we need to start there and make sure that, again, Norway's staving off Russia away from Svalbard.
David, your response?
Well, and I failed to mention the vast minerals in Greenland that we will have the ability to mine and secure for not just Greenland's prosperity, but also for the prosperity of the United States and also its protection in the world markets where these minerals are essential. So that's also a plus. In regards to Alaska, we do have our bases and we do have our military installations in Alaska. And if there was any type of threat from Russia, I think it would be immediately met by those installations and those forces in Alaska and also in Hawaii. Because my fiance's son is in the Navy, and last year, and her son-in-law are in the Army and the Navy, there was a mass buildup, and this wasn't really reported. And it was told to us a little bit later after it was done, but there was a mass buildup of military, U.S. military and international military allies in and around Hawaii. And they were supposed to be having war games or practicing or whatever, but it was strange to see that or hear about that happening. I think for America, the only issue that we perceive that may be perceived as a problem from China is maybe Taiwan. But given the Donroe Doctrine, that's Taiwan and China's problem, despite the fact that the United States has already made it clear, if you're going to mess with Taiwan, there's going to be repercussions. But that's a whole different conversation. Also, there have been there was one incident of a Russian submarine.
Yes, it was Russian.
Just off of Florida. And I think there was one found a little bit closer to Greenland. I have to look into that one, but there was an incident. There was one in Greenland. But again, there's dozens every year next to Svalbard and even more next to Alaska. Right. I think that, granted, the administration could have goals that they're just not communicating. That's entirely possible. But I think the goals they are communicating are a little questionable because, they'll bring up legitimate issues, but they're even more legitimate elsewhere. So it doesn't cost as much
to get what we need elsewhere, compared to if we have to, push up against our allies, we have to, pay $100,000 to every Greenlander. It's more effort for fewer returns, which is why I've always been a little suspect. And I like to comment on the Monroe Doctrine thing a little bit, because I've always found it very interesting. I'm going to preface this by saying people interpret history and split the difference between what people think differently. I'm going to start us with that. But it doesn't, they invoke the Monroe Doctrine because, it has the circle on the map. This is the hemisphere. But I feel like the goals of the Monroe Doctrine and the Monroe Doctrine are in many ways almost opposites, right? The Monroe Doctrine, the way I've always read it, at least as understanding as what Monroe has himself had put up there, it was an idea of American isolationism. That's one thing they have in common. They're kind of have an isolationist thing going on, but it was the politics that happened out there. Because keep in mind, this is a time when Europe couldn't stop getting themselves in Napoleonic wars.
Exactly, those 4 other wars.
So there was this concern of, hey, what happens out there, we wouldn't like it to happen here as much. Here's the thing: we won't be into your business. You won't be into the business in this circle, and we'll learn to live with ourselves. And it wasn't that they wouldn't have colonies in the area, or that America would literally control that, because that wasn't quite how it worked. But it was just a general thought of principles, like, we'll care what happens in here, but we're not going to care that much about what happens out there. It was just drawing lines in the sand, and it was almost an act of clarity, right? It was an act of clarity. This is people in the rest of the world. This is kind of where our mind is at. It was very defensive in mind, right? We didn't want to get roped into as many things. I think with the Monroe Doctrine, it's more about pushing out, right? It's more about how much more control can we have over, different huge elements of the economy. Because if you look at what makes Venezuela or Greenland important, it's not just because of what happens here, it's because of what it means for the broader world stage, right? If you have Greenland, it's not necessarily they have more defensive, it's also they have more offensive capabilities. When you're looking at Venezuela, it's not just oil prices here, it's, having our hand in a jar of, one of the biggest industries in the world, something that literally makes the world go round. It's busting white collar crime. This is something that was brought up a lot with Maduro, because, it was a hub for white collar crime worldwide. It's, hey, we're going to break the world's financial up. It wasn't really all that much. I mean, some of it, of course, comes back to here, but it was just as much for everybody else, right? It's a projection of power, not as much a defensive shell, I think, is the ultimate goal here. It's a projection of power. It's a projection of influence, while the Monroe Doctrine was meant to restrain influence. It's kind of just kind of a thing I was thinking about recently.
I see what you're saying as far as restrained influence in our own backyard, the Western Hemisphere. Russia, they got their interests in their own backyard. China, they have their interests in their own backyard.
Yeah.
We can no longer be the police of the international world. It's
the Cold War is over. The Cold War is over. It's been over.
The forever wars have nearly bankrupt America. We just continue. We were $39 trillion in debt, and we're carrying the load for our European allies. Now they have to pick up the slack. They have to pay for their own militaries. As we build and build and build up our military, they've scaled back. Canada has practically no military.
So it's been kind of mixed. Like, some of them, you're right, they have scaled back. And Canada is the biggest example of somebody scaling back, because they live right next door to us. But others have been scaling up. I mean, we've seen, for years, we've sustained Japan and South Korea without really much input from us. They've decided they want to arm themselves again, especially Japan. Japan is really pushing to arm themselves because they're concerned about China, because they're concerned about what China might do in their backyard. Japan has dug themselves a happy little space. They don't want to leave it. They don't want China to pull them out of it. You've seen, Finland has joined in. Finland is a very armed country. I think a lot of people don't really realize this about Finland. They have a big army. They have conscription. It's a whole thing. You have Germany. They've been expanding. You have Britain, which, we don't think of it as much of a military power anymore. Still one of the strongest navies in the world. Same goes for France. There are some places that have been still arming up more and more. And of course, naturally, as a result of their war, Ukraine is now more armed than they were. And as far as foreign wars go, it's worth noting they come in for us as well. In Iraq, who was there? The United Kingdom. who was there during Afghanistan? Basically, all of NATO had people in Afghanistan supporting us. They send troops all the time. I mean, we won't even send our own people into Ukraine.
But we carried the load. We carried the load in Iraq. We carried the load in Afghanistan. Sure. And who benefited? The English crown, the city of London, and the banks, who are profiting from these forever wars. And Trump is saying, we're done with that. You guys defend yourselves on your dime, and we're going to defend ourselves in our hemisphere. And we're ending these forever wars that really have made America go into significant debt.
Okay. We are, I promise, Sean, we're going to end this pretty soon. Okay. I promise.
I wanted to shift it to sort of maybe the ethical debate here. Right. This discussion is very in-depth, and I like that you guys are sort of sharing your perspectives here, but we do want to move on. So my last question in this segment is to the both of you. Kellen, and I'll go to Kellen first, if 56,000 Greenlanders take the money, does the UN Charter on Self-Determination even matter anymore?
Sure. I was actually about to pivot to some ethical stuff anyway, so this works out great. I mean, the UN as a whole has been on the struggle recently. We've kind of been seeing this shift ever since the Cold War ended towards a more civilizational world where what happens, where the world is almost more drawn into regions. It's drawn by culture and ethnicity primarily, right? It's who you are, not what economic system you believe in. We've been kind of seeing this again ever since the Cold War ended. Conflict has happened somehow, and now it's about who you are. And the UN has been struggling under that kind of world because that kind of world doesn't favor the UN as much as a Cold War world does. And as far as the idea of self-determination, self-sovereignty goes, it's not that countries have the right or territories have the right to secede. That has never been a component of it. If they were to take the money, right? Greenland were to go off and, decide that you know what, the money is worth it. We're going to join America, even though we didn't want to before. I don't know how much of an impact it would have on the UN. I think a UN needs to solve its problem of funding before its problem of influence, more than anything else. And I think it would be perfectly well in line with a lot of these doctrines, at least as if I'm understanding your question correctly. I feel like that would, in a lot of ways, be in line with it. And in some ways, no, because it's the U.S. kind of fighting for Denmark. But what the U.S. is proposing is a referendum that it happens in a political process and not a war process. And I'm no expert on international law. I'm no expert on the United Nations. But if a transfer has to happen some way, I think most people, in the UN or with the UN type mindset would prefer it happen politically than militarily.
Okay. And David, your response?
I think, 500 grand for each of the 56,000 or so Greenlanders would do the trick. Greenland, the opposition party, has been very vocal about some type of sovereignty solution for Greenlanders. There is a tense relationship between Greenlanders and the Danish crown. The forced sterilization of its women and among other things have caused for a certain demographic in Greenland to say, hey, enough is enough. Greenland has always been on the table for America, going back to, I think it was 1953 or 51, if I remember correctly, when the first agreement was made to have U.S. bases in Greenland. I think 16 of them. And now we're down to one. Well, that's going to drastically increase under this new agreement, or this the past treaty or agreement on steroids. Now, the Trump administration will acquire rights to mineral mining, access to Greenland for the Golden Dome for national security. I think in all the hysteria over ICE and Greenland and just Trump in general, people forget that Trump is a great negotiator. And again, he'll start up here knowing that we'll meet here. And you see that with the ICE demonstrations and interfering with ICE investigations in Minnesota. He threw, you know, instating the Insurrection Act, which I shouldn't use that term. There's a better term, but in essence, for everyone listening and watching, the Insurrection Act. As we see, the Insurrection Act was not put into place. Instead, there was a conversation with the governor, Tim Walz, and lo and behold, Mr. Walz is no longer running for reelection. He's going to lick his wounds. He's going to take whatever money he has raised, for lack of a better word, and go away. It was all, manufactured performative drama. There are real fraud investigations that will have arrests. Trump seems to, be a step or two ahead of the rest of us, and it's all in the art of the deal. Am I a big fan of Trump? Not really. However, am I a fan of his America First approach, whether it's Greenland, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Cuba or Mexico? I believe that he's working in the best interest of Americans, of the nation, and of our sovereign partners. And we don't have to be in this, these forever wars anymore. We don't have to ship our jobs overseas anymore. He's bringing all that back, all these manufacturing jobs. He's making life better, ever so slowly, because that's how the world works. But he is making things better for Americans, and he's putting America first, as we saw in those examples I just gave.
I agree, David. And I mean, we have Saint Alex Preddy and Saint Rene Good out there, and they look like the fools now. You want to come in the way of things and try to disrupt that. You're going to make Trump look like you're trying to say that Trump's the fool in the process of all this, and he doesn't know what he's doing. Is when other people come in, well, they're no longer here. He rises above all of that. Bringing it home, yesterday was the registration deadline for municipal elections in Edenville with Apopka and Winter Park right around the corner on March 10th. Is AI becoming a battleground for the Orange County mayoral race? David, there's a risk of deepfake candidates in local Orlando ads. Voters are getting calls that sound like they're representative, but they're AI generated bots. With Orange County facing a $41 million school budget shortfall. Is AI the distraction candidates are using to avoid talking about why we're closing multiple schools or avoiding other topics at large? Is AI in this?
And very quickly, AI is not being used in a way that will determine elections. I believe, I know because I'm in this business. I know that AI is not being used in an effective way that will, determine the outcome of a candidate strategy. There are very few of our competitors that even know how to use the different AIs to create agents that can actually do what is needed to, I guess, make effective, strategies. We've always had robocalls, which are illegal to some extent, that were manufactured by, some, special interests or whatever. We've always had that. In regards to the Orange County School District having to close 7 schools, this is a trend that started with the election of Ron DeSantis and his championing home schooling, charter schooling, in essence, school choice. And also the legislature not too long ago allowing more funds to be used by parents to go to a charter school, go to a private school, go elsewhere. So we're seeing the we're seeing the results of these policies. I have not eaten anything all day. I played tennis
Me
this morning.
neither. I feel you.
And we're seeing the results of these policies, and we're also seeing the effects of immigration. Immigration. Help me out.
In our
Kellen.
schools, I mean, I agree. When you look at this and
Enforcement.
the immigration have, I think that school choice is great. I think that families should be afforded that choice. I do want to sort of, we're going to wrap up soon. I'm going to bring it back to Steve. When we're looking at elections and with your expertise, cyber attacks, how that sort of plays a role locally. There was a recent Verizon outage, the Amazon Web Services outage in October 2025 could also have been possibly a cyber attack, just like Verizon, that impacts IoT, disabling 8 sleep smart beds, causing heating, cooling issues, and affecting Ring smart doorbells. Right. So when we're looking at the elections, is this going to be something that's hitting the ballot box? These concerns, are candidates or should candidates be raising those issues?
I mean, I'm not too familiar with the actual systems other than that they're supposed to have an SD card. I mean, it sounds pretty old for the technology and proprietary. So there's supposed to be like an SD card or a USB that gets inserted and the file is copied over. And I believe there's a hash. I think it uses hash technology, which is still valid to this day. It's old, but it works. So basically, a hash is basically, there's a receipt printed. It says this is your hash, and then when they get the file in Tallahassee or something, the hash matches or something. So you basically get a check to show that that file has not been tampered with. And they're not, I don't think they're connected to the internet. I hope not, because I think that's the only way you could compromise is physically at the machine, or maybe it's connected to the internet. So I just hope, I'm sure there's a lot of security experts and multiple people that hammer those things out. So I hope that's, I know the Dominion thing, they all went to a central server. I didn't really read too much about that, but I mean, I think the security's there. I have confidence in it. I think for someone to, it would have to be someone on the inside, and then it could be like one of those McMillions documentaries 20 years from now. But I think it's a stretch. It's a stretch. So
Steve, just to clarify, I've had a tour of the supervisor of elections office here in Orange County and seen the process. Everyone gets a paper ballot. The machines are not connected to the internet, so that's very clear. And I've, listened in and watched the canvassing board, who are made up of elected officials and the judge, go through the process. I went through the tabulation exercises and things like that. So for the most part, here in Orange County, we do a very good job of protecting the vote.
And that's good to hear. Just to make it clear, though, I think these are concerns, sentiments that we're seeing when people are not educated on AI, and that although we know that these systems are secure, how can we ensure that there's a trust and belief in those systems?
My only concern would be with AI is if someone receives, like the way I know for a fact, I always do in-person voting.
Yep.
And the reason why I do that is because I see it go in that machine, because I do have trust in that machine. If I didn't trust, I wouldn't vote. No, I vote. Mm-hmm. I put it in that machine. I know that machine, and sometimes old technology is the best technology. Exactly. Don't change it. Just leave it. Yep. The systems are there. It's been hammered. You know what I mean? It's good.
Yep.
Now, when you my only concern is with AI is, I've done this with documents. I get a document in the mail and or something I have for my business, and it's something that I need updated, an old contract, and it's like, doing OCR and all that through the old technology. Now I can just send it to AI and say, hey, can you make this look the same, but just change a few things so that I can issue this new document, price sheet, or whatever to my customers. Who's to say you can't do that with AI and then fake a ballot and then mail it? I don't know. That's my only concern with AI is it has so much access to public voter data. You know what I mean? And I don't know how that process works. That's why it's like I don't know. That's where I have a concern. I have a concern with AI with that is someone can manipulate the mail-in system because the AI has access to that. I mean, you could write in Google, they call them gems. You can write a gem that goes out and grabs data. And what if it just gets, I don't know. That's just me. That's me being paranoid, but
I do have one more question, and then I'll let everyone give their closing thoughts. Kellen, I did want to ask,
Yeah.
would you say that there are AI-driven campaign tools being used to micro-target voters in the I-4 corridor? Or
In theory, there absolutely are, and we know some individuals who do. And he's cackling over there because he knows it's he and I who do it. Most people don't really make the best use of it. You got to remember, like with local politics, it's usually older folks. I mean, it's all politics right now, but especially local politics, it's usually older folks. Whatever technology we start to see in the federal, it slowly comes down. That's how it goes. And most candidates aren't out here really using their technology to the fullest. A lot of them don't even know how to run, don't even know how to like create a social media account, right? Which is why you have great political consultants like Jay in Washington who actually do know how to use these things so that you don't have to. Sometimes they are used sometimes, but they're not. They're the exception, not the rule, I would say.
So we discussed a lot today. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. I wanted to give you each the opportunity to sort of give your closing thoughts. I know we discussed a lot, from the missing in Tucson to the oil in Caracas and the voters in Orlando. The message is clear. The code is the new border. I'm going to start with David. Your closing thoughts, anything you would like to discuss or rebuke to anyone on the panel?
Right. With municipal elections coming up in March here in Orange County, of course, the August primaries, and then the midterm election, general election in November. Everyone, please make sure you're registered and conduct and activate and just exercise your civic responsibility to vote.
Kellen?
Right. Supervisor Elections Office, if people are concerned about the integrity of voting, make some communications. Communication is, or a lack thereof, is the crux of a lot of concerns a lot of times. How we use technology in the future is going to be very, very important. Our greatest threats oftentimes will no longer just be like firearms pointed at us. It will be code pointed at our systems. And again, I'd like to thank Steve for coming on here, especially in this episode for really, kind of bringing a little bit more knowledge and perspective that I would lack to communicate this issue. But it's a huge issue. Globally, I think it's important, it's very important to look back at history and to not mutilate it in favor of a narrative we want today. It's important to actually understand where things come from, and it's important to make sure we're protected. And we need to be asking, where is our interests? Where is our defense best served? No matter where that falls down, you got to look at where the action is, what action is happening, and what is being done to stop it, and whether or not that's appropriate. I think I would highly recommend looking into the Arctic Institute. They have a ton of great resources related to the Greenland scenarios, coming at it from a decent variety of angles, but with many years of experience, lots of expertise, and there's lots of great stuff out there. If you want to learn more about Greenland, that's where I would start. And that's all I have to say.
And Steve, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think cyber warfare is here. I think it's being used. Like you mentioned, the Amazon outage and Verizon, that impacted home devices. And also, I would say change your password, know who has access to your accounts. I mean, that's number one, is protect you. Don't worry too much about the other things. Just focus on you. Who has access to your accounts, and what technology do you have at home that monitors your entry and exit of your house, and know who has access to those. And maybe you should share your access to trusted people and loved ones, and have them set up alerts so that they're checking up on you, because that's the smart thing to do.
Okay, if you guys want to stay ahead of the tidal wave, see what I did there? You need to be on the platform that isn't controlled by the states. That's why we launched the King Exchange this month. We're going to help you navigate this chaos with clarity. And for those of you looking for a secure way to move your assets while the US remotely runs foreign economies, look at T8020 token and exchange. While the traditional grid is vulnerable, the T8020 at j-washington.com/T8020 is built for the decentralized future. Steve, Kellen, David, thanks for the breakthrough. Orlando, get out and register. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank-
Sean, Steve, Kellen.
Thank you.